Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. So this is just after finishing my fertility clinic for the day. It's been a long day. I see quite a few patients from first thing in the morning to now 5:15 in the afternoon. I see a variety of patients ranging from the young and desperate to know whether they can get pregnant to older women who just want me to help them get pregnant to those that have been successful. So it's always nice to start the morning with a success. Jeanette came in this morning now at 7.5 weeks of pregnancy following a frozen embryo transfer. She's 38 years old and she'd been through 2 cycles of IVF in the past. Out of the second cycle of IVF, we were able to get 1 frozen blastocyst. That's a day 5 embryo of good quality. And 5 weeks ago, I put that embryo back inside the womb and she had a positive pregnancy test 10 days later. Not surprisingly, she was delighted. And now this morning, for the first time, we could actually, on ultrasound, see a fetus, only about 1.5 centimetres in length, so tiny yet, but we could see a heart beating. And at this point, both she and her husband were smiling big faces, very, very happy that all their efforts have finally reached the possibility of a baby at the end of the day. At 7.5 weeks, not out of the woods yet. We know that from 7.5 weeks to 12 weeks, there is about a 5 to 10% chance of miscarriage. The fact that we've seen a heartbeat today is positive, but there still is a chance of miscarriage. So we're going to see her again in a couple of weeks to reassure them that the pregnancy is going well. She's actually on some medication to support for the early pregnancy, some injections of HCG, which is the pregnancy hormone, which stimulates progesterone production and from the ovary. And it's the progesterone that keeps the uterus quiet, stops it from expelling the pregnancy and promotes growth of the fetus. So will be due in 7 months' time, and I'm sure that will be a very happy day in their lives. We've still got 1 embryo in storage, so hopefully in a year or so's time, she'll be able to come back, have that embryo transferred, and perhaps get the second baby that they've dreamed about. They went away obviously very happy. The next couple, however, Jack and Therese, not such a happy story. Therese is now 43 years old and only met Jack last year, and she never thought she'd meet Mr. Right, but finally she has. And obviously the ultimate result of a couple getting together is to have a baby. She's always dreamed about having a baby, and now she has a partner to hopefully get that wish. Unfortunately, age is not on her side. At 43, the chances of falling pregnant naturally, probably no more than in a 12-month time frame. In the next 12 months, she probably only has a 15 to 20% chance of falling pregnant on her own. So after trying for 6 months, their GP has referred them along to us to see whether there's anything that we can do to improve that chance. So we start with investigations. The most important thing is to know that she's still got eggs remaining, and there's a blood test called the anti-Müllerian hormone, which gives us some idea of the number of eggs left. It's called a measure of the ovarian reserve. In a woman of 43, that's likely to be low, but what we hope is that it's not very low and that she's heading towards the menopause. We'll know that result in the next couple of weeks. We also do a range of hormone tests as well, again checking whether she's heading towards the menopause. The second thing we check is that his semen quality is good. And although apparently he had fathered a child in a previous relationship 15 years ago, times do change and we need to be checking that his sperm is okay. So he'll be doing that sperm test for us in the next couple of weeks and we'll have a result when we next see them. The third thing that stops pregnancy occurring naturally is obviously if the sperm and the egg can't get together. And to check that, we've got to check that the fallopian tubes are open so that the sperm can swim up through the neck of the womb, through the uterus and out into the fallopian tube where hopefully an egg will be waiting to be fertilised in that middle part of the month. There are various ways of checking whether the tubes are open or not. The gold standard is a laparoscopy. So that's keyhole surgery where we put the patient to sleep. We put a telescope through the belly button and can squirt blue dye up from the cervix through the fallopian tubes and we can see it spilling out. That procedure obviously does require surgery with its inherent risks and some time off work because it's not a particularly comfortable procedure and takes some days to recover from. The lesser ways of checking the tubes, but certainly give us the basic answer, is either an ultrasound or a X-ray procedure. These involve squirting dye up through the neck of the womb and watching either on the ultrasound screen or on the radiographer's screen, the dye coursing its way through the fallopian tubes and out into the abdominal cavity. These are outpatient procedures, take 15 or 20 minutes, but really quite straightforward. And they give us the basic answer whether the tubes are open or not. They can also be therapeutic. In other words, by flushing through the tubes, we may actually clear out blockages that were there. The fallopian tubes, a bit like all mucous membranes, secrete mucus, and that mucus can dry and form little plugs. And in a fallopian tube, which is only 1 millimetre in diameter, can block a tube. So flushing those out with these investigative procedures can sometimes result in pregnancy in the subsequent cycles. I've got personal experience of that 2 of our children were conceived in the month after my wife had the tubes flushed through. So I'm a great believer in this. So we organised all those investigations for the couple and sent them off to have their blood tests today, organised the sperm test and arranged a time for the X-ray to be done to check the tubes, and I'll see them again in a month's time with all of those results and we can make some more specific predictions of her chances of success. But sadly, it's not going to be great. At 43, the odds are low. I then saw a patient, these are always very sad cases. This is a girl at the age of 32 who, after some symptoms of bleeding and abdominal pain, was diagnosed with cancer of the colon about 3 weeks ago. She had an operation 10 days ago to remove half her bowel. The cancer had spread to the lymph nodes, and so her next step will be quite significant chemotherapy, drugs to kill the cancer. Unfortunately, a side effect of the drugs that kill the cancer is it also kills off eggs in the ovary, and it's highly likely her ovaries are not going to be able to produce eggs in the future. That chemotherapy is due to start in 2 weeks' time. So we have a window of 2 weeks in which to harvest eggs, put them with her husband's sperm, and create embryos which will freeze. And when she's recovered from her cancer, we'll be able to put those embryos in her uterus and she can have a baby. This is called fertility preservation. And we're offering this for almost all young women who have cancer diagnosed these days, breast cancer, blood cancers. And we are doing these as emergency procedures, stimulating her ovaries and hopefully getting in before the chemotherapy is required. For her, today, Janice will start her injections to stimulate the follicles to grow for us to collect the eggs probably in about 10 to 12 days' time. Hopefully we'll get enough eggs to give her a good chance of a pregnancy in the future. In the room today, as often is the case, there was her and her mother and her sister and obviously her husband. They're all obviously keen to know that there was a possibility to retain fertility in some way or another, but also monitoring what was going on and in particular, obviously, being sure that we weren't going to inhibit the chances of her making a full recovery from her cancer. She went off with our senior nurse and the rest of them to actually go through the detail of her treatment cycle. We are attuned to these particular patients, and I think we provide them with a lot of support during this time, which is really traumatic for them, coping with cancer and then the potential for never being able to have a baby. The next patient was Jackie, and Jackie was 22 years old, quite young, and for me anyway, normally my fertility patients are much older. But she came inquiring about the possibilities of getting pregnant, recently married and quite keen to get on with it, but knowing that at the age of 17 that she'd been referred to a gynecologist who said she had polycystic ovarian syndrome. She'd been on the pill until just recently, till she got married, and has come off the pill now and hasn't had a period now for nearly 2 months, which is typical of polycystic ovarian syndrome. I like patients with polycystic ovarian syndrome because they're the easiest ones to get pregnant. Mostly, all we need to do is to make them ovulate. And to ovulate and make an egg is relatively straightforward, with mostly being achieved just by 5 tablets every month. So with her case, before we embark on treatment, we're going to do appropriate investigations, which include checking his sperm. No point in taking medication if he's got a sperm problem. And that she has open fallopian tubes, which we'll do with an X-ray test. And once we've got those results, we'll be starting her on some oral medication, 1 tablet a day for 5 days. And in about 80% of cases, we'll get her making an egg on a monthly basis, and she should be pregnant soon. They went away, again, happy that there was likely to be a pregnancy in the near future. After lunch, the first patient was a 32-year-old lady, Rosanna. And Rosanna was a bit of a surprise to me because the women I normally see keen to have babies with donor sperm are usually in their late 30s, who by that stage haven't been able to find a partner and are getting desperate that the time is running out and they will need to use donor sperm to have the baby they've always planned on, ever since they were teenagers. But Rosanna was, at 32, was a little surprising in that she'd already made that decision that she wanted to have a baby now, and the way she was going to do it was through donor sperm in a fertility clinic, which is obviously the safest option. One could go out and have one-night stands, but there's other risks associated with that of sexually transmitted diseases, and the screening that we do on our donors in terms of genetic diseases, of infectious diseases, obviously doesn't apply in that scenario. So Rosanna sat and told me about her desires to have a baby sooner rather than later. She's a qualified accountant, financially can support a child. It's what she's always wanted. And so we took her through the processes involved, which are not little. And the first step in this is attending counselling with our fertility counsellor to go through the implications of being a single mother, to make sure she's thought all of the issues through. We also talk through the fact that although she'll never know the donor whose sperm is being used, there is the potential for her child to gain access to that information when they get to the age of 18. Since every donor who produces a child in New South Wales goes on a register with the Ministry of Health, and that information is available to the donor child in the future. Once they've gone through the counselling process, and they reach the top of the waiting list, which at the moment is actually quite short at less than 3 months, our donor team contacts the patient, and the patient is given access to a la carte list which they can go through and decide the characteristics of the donor that they feel would be appropriate for them. Having selected the donor, then that donor is allocated to them, and that they can then go through treatment cycles to produce a pregnancy. She'll then come back and see me at that point, and we'll start to organise whether it's going to be an insemination cycle or whether it has to be an IVF cycle. That's dependent on the quality of the sperm donor's sperm, which is a little variable, and we do take lower quality sperm because we do have a shortage of donors. But that sperm will produce pregnancies at a normal rate, but will require IVF and sperm injection to achieve them. She went off to talk to our nurses, sorted out the forms to go on our waiting list, and the next time I'll see her will probably be when she's been informed that she has a sperm donor, and that we will then be sitting down and working out the details of her treatment to use that donor sperm. She seemed very happy that she'd made the decision to move forward in this particular approach to gaining what she really wants, which is a baby. So that was some of my day. In the next episode, perhaps we'll explore a few more of the more controversial issues that IVF has thrown up over the last 12 months or so. We talk about gender selection, we might talk about older women having babies, whether IVF is appropriate for certain groups of patients, and how funding should work for IVF and the implications of that. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.